3 days before Thanksgiving, my son called me and said 9 words that broke something inside me I didn't know could still break. Dad, don't come. Jenna says, it's not a good time. I was standing in my garage in Calgary, Alberta, holding a wrench in one hand and my phone in the other, staring at the workbench I had built when he was 10 years old. I was 63. I had spent 35 years being his father, coaching his hockey team, driving him to school every morning in -30 weather, helping him through university, standing beside him at his wedding. And now his wife had decided I wasn't welcome at their Thanksgiving table. So I spent that Thanksgiving weekend alone in my house, eating leftover roast chicken from Safeway and watching the leaves fall in my backyard, wondering when exactly I had become someone my own son could discard, like an old pair of skates. On the Monday after, I walked into a Tim Hortons on McLeod Trail because I couldn't stand the silence in my house anymore. The place was nearly empty, just me and an older couple sitting by the window, sharing a box of Timbits and laughing about something. The woman caught my eye and smiled, and something about that smile made me feel like the loneliest man in the province. I didn't know that walking into that Tim Hortons would be the single most important thing I ever did. 6 years later, my son stood in my kitchen with his head in his hands, and only then did I understand what that ordinary Monday morning had set in motion. Thank you for being here and taking the time to listen. Please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to connect with you. And just a quick note before we start. Some details in this story have been adjusted for privacy, but the heart of it is real. Every emotion, every lesson, every word that mattered actually happened. My name is David, and I had just turned 63 that autumn. I'm 69 now, telling you this with 6 years of distance and clarity I desperately needed back then. I spent most of my adult life believing I had done everything right as a father. I worked 31 years as a mechanical engineer for an energy company here in Calgary. I owned my home outright. I had a solid pension. I showed up to every single hockey game, every parent-teacher conference, every school play, where my son Nathan played a tree or a shepherd or whatever they needed him to be. I thought love meant showing up and providing. I thought if I did those things faithfully enough, my family would always have room for me at the table. But sitting alone in that house on Thanksgiving weekend, eating cold chicken straight from the container, I learned something that men my age don't like to admit. You can do everything right and still end up with nobody to share it with. Nathan was my only child. His mother, Diane, and I divorced when he was 14. It wasn't ugly, just sad. We had grown apart the way people do when they're so focused on raising a kid that they forget to keep raising the marriage. Diane moved to Vancouver after the divorce and remarried a few years later. Nathan stayed with me through high school, and we were close. Or I thought we were. He met Jenna in his 3rd year at the University of Alberta. She was studying law. He was in business. She was smart, driven, from a wealthy family in Toronto. Her parents owned commercial real estate in the GTA and had very specific ideas about how life should be lived and who was worth associating with. From the beginning, I felt like I was being measured against a standard I couldn't see. The first time I met Jenna's parents at a dinner in Edmonton, her father asked me what I drove. When I said a 10-year-old Ford F-150, he looked at me like I had told him I lived in a cardboard box. But Nathan loved her, and she seemed to love him. So I kept my mouth shut and focused on being supportive. I helped them with their down payment when they bought a townhouse in Edmonton after Nathan graduated. $35,000 from my savings, no strings attached. Jenna never mentioned it again, not once. Like it had simply materialized from thin air. The problems started slowly. Jenna would make comments about my house being small, about Calgary being less sophisticated than Toronto, about how Nathan deserved better than his father's blue-collar lifestyle. I told myself she didn't mean it, that she was just young and hadn't learned yet that money doesn't determine a person's worth. Nathan started visiting less. Calls went from weekly to monthly to whenever Jenna decided it was convenient. When their daughter was born, my granddaughter Sophie, I drove 5 hours to Edmonton the day after. Jenna met me at the door and told me they weren't ready for visitors yet. I stood on their front porch holding a stuffed bear and a card, and Nathan appeared behind her and said, "Maybe next week, Dad. She just needs some space." Next week turned into 3 weeks, By the time I finally held Sophie, she was almost a month old, and Jenna hovered the entire visit like I might contaminate her child with my ordinariness. The Thanksgiving incident happened 2 years later. Sophie was 2. I had been planning to drive up to Edmonton, had already bought the turkey and the cranberry sauce. Nathan called me on the Tuesday. "Dad, don't come. Jenna says it's not a good time." I asked why. He hesitated. "Her parents are flying in from Toronto, and the house is small, and she's stressed about hosting. And honestly, Dad, that thing you said at Sophie's birthday didn't help." The thing I had said at Sophie's birthday was that Jenna's father might be wrong about the housing market. That was it. One mild disagreement about real estate prices, spoken quietly over cake, and I had been convicted of a crime I didn't know was on the books. "Nathan," I said, "I'm your father. I haven't seen Sophie in 2 months. Can't we figure something out?" "Dad, please." He sounded exhausted in a way that made me realize this conversation wasn't his idea. "Just not this year. We'll sort something out for Christmas." Maybe. Christmas came and went. No invitation. No call. I sent gifts for Sophie, a wooden rocking horse I had built by hand in my garage. Nathan texted me a photo of her sitting on it. "Thanks, Dad. She loves it." 4 words. That was my Christmas. So there I was on that Monday morning in Tim Hortons, 63 years old, retired 6 months early because I couldn't concentrate at work anymore, sitting alone with a double-double and a sour cream glazed, wondering if this was what the rest of my life looked like. The couple by the window were Frank and Helen Olsen. I know that now, of course, but at the time they were just 2 strangers who happened to look happy in a way I had forgotten was possible. Frank was 70, tall and lean with a white beard that made him look like a friendlier version of a university professor. Helen was 68, compact and energetic, with reading glasses perched on her head and paint under her fingernails. Frank got up to refill their coffees and stopped at my table on his way back. "You look like a man who's carrying something heavy," he said. Not in a prying way, more like a statement of fact from someone who recognized the weight. "I'm fine," I said, which was obviously a lie. Frank nodded. "Well, my wife and I come here every Monday morning. If you're ever not fine and want some company, we're usually right over there by the window." I thanked him and expected that to be the end of it. But the next Monday, I found myself driving to the same Tim Hortons at the same time. Frank and Helen were there. Helen waved me over before I could even order, and that was it. That was the beginning. Within a month, Monday morning, Tim Hortons became a fixed point in my week. Frank had been a high school shop teacher for 32 years in Red Deer before they moved to Calgary for retirement. Helen was a watercolor artist who sold her paintings at the Inglewood Night Market and taught classes at the community center. They had 2 sons. The older one, Craig, lived in Kelowna with his family. The younger one, Mark, had died in a car accident on the Trans-Canada 8 years earlier. He was 31. Helen told me about Mark during our 3rd Monday together. She said it matter-of-factly, the way people do when they've carried a grief so long, it has become part of their architecture. "We lost our boy on the highway between Banff and Lake Louise," she said. "Black ice. He was coming home for Christmas. For a long time afterward, I didn't think I could survive it. But you do survive. You just learn to carry it differently." Frank put his hand on her shoulder and looked at me. "The reason I spoke to you that first day, David, is because I saw a man who looked like he was just starting to learn how to carry something he didn't think he could." I recognized the look. I told them about Nathan, about Jenna, about the Thanksgiving phone call, about the rocking horse and the 4-word text. Helen listened with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup and her eyes full of something that wasn't pity but understanding. "You know what the hardest part is," she said. "It's not the rejection. It's the not knowing why you weren't enough." That was exactly it. That was the thing I couldn't articulate to myself. And this woman I had known for 3 weeks said it like she had pulled it directly from my chest. By spring, the Monday coffees had expanded. Frank invited me to help him restore a 1972 Chevelle he was working on in his garage. I started joining Helen's Thursday painting class at the Inglewood Community Center, despite having 0 artistic talent. I was terrible. But Helen insisted that art wasn't about being good, it was about being present. She'd stand behind me while I murdered another watercolor landscape and say, "David, you're trying to control the water. Let it go where it wants." Not a bad metaphor for life, actually. Frank and Helen introduced me to their circle. There was George, a retired RCMP officer, who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. There was Mabel, a 74-year-old former librarian who could quote Leonard Cohen and swear like a pipeline worker in the same breath. There was Raj, a widower from Punjabi heritage who made the best butter chicken in southern Alberta and insisted on feeding everyone, whether they were hungry or not. These people became my world. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but the way a river carves a valley. Slowly, steadily, irreversibly. Every Monday coffee, every Thursday painting class, every Saturday barbecue in Frank's backyard, every holiday dinner at someone's kitchen table. I was being woven into something. A community, a family. Not the family I was born into or the one I had raised, but one that had chosen me, deliberately and repeatedly, for no reason other than they wanted me there. I didn't hear from Nathan for 14 months after that Thanksgiving. Not on my birthday. Not on Father's Day. Not at Christmas. I sent cards and gifts for Sophie, and twice I got brief texts acknowledging them. I called 4 times. Nathan was always busy and always promised to call back. He never did. The silence was a constant ache, like a bruise that never fully healed. But the ache existed now, alongside something else. Purpose. Warmth. The sound of Frank laughing at his own terrible jokes. The smell of Helen's studio, turpentine and cedar. The feeling of Raj pressing a container of leftover curry into my hands and saying, "You're too skinny, David, eat." One evening in November, about 16 months after that first Tim Hortons morning, I arrived at Frank and Helen's house for dinner and found Frank sitting alone on the front porch in the cold, staring at the mountains in the distance. His face was drawn in a way I hadn't seen before. I sat down beside him. We were quiet for a while. Then he spoke. "Craig called today. Their son in Kelowna. He's bringing his family for Christmas. First time in 4 years." Frank's voice was steady, but his hands were clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "I should be happy, David." And I am, but it made me think about Mark. About how he was driving home to see us when he died. About how I sometimes wish Craig would call more. And then I feel guilty for wanting that because at least Craig is alive to not call. He looked at me. "Don't let the silence with Nathan become permanent. I know it hurts. I know it feels safer to stop trying. But permanent silence is a different kind of animal, David. It eats you from the inside. I carry Mark's silence every day. You still have a chance not to carry Nathan's." I thought about Frank's words for weeks. I thought about them when I drove past the mall and almost went in to buy something for Sophie. I thought about them when Father's Day passed, without a word. But the fear of hearing Nathan say "don't come again" kept me frozen. The rejection felt too familiar. The wound was still too fresh. Then, exactly 2 years after the Thanksgiving phone call, Nathan called me on a Wednesday evening. I was at Frank and Helen's, helping Frank sand the Chevelle's hood panel, when my phone buzzed. "Dad." His voice was different. Flat. Stripped of the confidence I remembered. "Can we talk?" I walked outside into the cold November air, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I'm here, Nathan. Jenna and I are in trouble. Financial trouble." The words came out fast, rehearsed, the way people talk when they've been up all night practicing. "She made some investments that went bad. Really bad. And now we owe the CRA a lot of money. Back taxes. Penalties. And the mortgage is 3 months behind. And the line of credit is maxed. And if we don't come up with something soon, we could lose the house." I waited. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. I waited for the part where he would say he missed me, where he would apologize, where he would acknowledge that he had let 2 years pass without a real conversation, and that he was sorry. "Dad, I need $120,000. The number hit me like a fist. 120,000. That was almost a third of my total retirement savings. That was my safety net, my security, The money I had spent 31 years earning and carefully investing. Nathan, I said slowly, when was the last time we actually spoke? Before right now. Silence. Was it the Thanksgiving you uninvited me? I continued. Or was it the 4-word text after I sent Sophie a rocking horse I built with my own hands? 2 years, Nathan. Not a birthday card. Not a call on Father's Day. And now you're asking me for $120,000? That's not fair, Dad. You know things have been difficult with Jenna's schedule and her family and everything. Everything meaning me. I finished his sentence. Everything meaning I'm too unsophisticated for your wife's family. Too blue-collar. Too Calgary. I've been whatever Jenna needed me to be for 2 years, Nathan. I've been invisible. And now that you need money, suddenly I exist. You're my father. He was angry now. Doesn't that count for anything? Of course it does. It counts for everything. That's exactly why I'm saying no. The conversation that followed lasted 12 minutes. I know because I checked afterward. Nathan argued, pleaded, accused. He said I was bitter. He said I was selfish. He said I was choosing resentment over family. I told him I loved him. I told him I would always love him. But I also told him that giving him $120,000 would not fix what was actually broken. That Jenna's family would find another crisis, another reason to need my money while not needing my presence. That I had finally learned the difference between being loved and being used. The last thing he said was, "You know what, Dad? Jenna was right about you. She always said you'd let us down when it mattered. Don't bother calling." The line went dead. I stood in Frank's driveway in the cold, watching my breath rise into the dark Alberta sky, and waited for the devastation. It came, heavy and sharp, but underneath it was something I hadn't expected. The solid ground of knowing I had told the truth. I walked back into the garage. Frank took one look at my face, set down the sandpaper, and said, "Come inside. Helen's making tea." I told them everything at the kitchen table while Helen poured red rose tea, and Frank sat across from me, listening the way he always listened, completely, without interruption. When I finished, Helen reached across the table and held my hand. Boundaries aren't the same as abandonment, David. You remember that. Setting a limit on how much you'll let someone take from you doesn't mean you stopped loving them. It doesn't feel that way, I said. It feels like I just lost my son. Frank shook his head slowly. You didn't lose him tonight. You've been losing him for years. One small concession at a time. Tonight you just stopped pretending otherwise. He was right. I had been disappearing from my son's life for years. Every time I swallowed Jenna's condescension. Every time I drove home from Edmonton feeling smaller than when I arrived. Every time I told myself things would get better if I just tried harder, expected less, took up less space. I had been erasing myself to make Nathan's life easier, and he had let me vanish without ever once asking me to stay. What do I do now? I asked. You keep coming to Monday coffees, Helen said firmly. You keep painting terrible watercolors. You let us love you, and you trust that the rest will work out the way it's meant to. 4 years passed. 4 years without a word from Nathan. No birthday calls, no holiday messages, no photos of Sophie, who was growing up without knowing her grandfather. I learned about their life through fragments. Diane mentioned occasionally that Nathan and Jenna were still together. A mutual friend from my old company told me they had sorted out the tax situation somehow. They moved to a larger house in the suburbs of Edmonton. Sophie started kindergarten, then grade 1, then grade 2. Life went on with me, carefully cropped out of every photo. But my life went on too. I started volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, swinging hammers alongside people half my age and feeling useful again. I became a permanent fixture in the Olsen family orbit. When Craig and his family visited from Kelowna, they treated me like a family friend they'd known forever. Craig's kids called me Uncle David. I helped Frank finish the Chevelle, and we drove it to a car show in Lethbridge and won 3rd place. Helen convinced me to submit a painting to a community exhibition. It didn't win anything, but it hung on a wall in a gallery for 2 weeks, and I stood in front of it feeling a pride I hadn't felt in years. Mabel's health declined, and the group rallied around her, taking shifts to drive her to appointments, cooking meals, keeping her company. George started dating a woman he met at a curling bonspiel and was embarrassed about it at 73. Raj's daughter had a baby, and he became a grandfather for the first time and cried openly at Monday coffee. These people, this family I had stumbled into at a Tim Hortons on McLeod Trail. I was happy. Not the frantic happiness of someone trying to outrun loneliness, but the deep, quiet happiness of someone who had finally stopped looking for permission to belong. Then came the phone call that changed everything again. It was a Tuesday morning in January. I was at the community center helping set up chairs for Helen's painting class when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The area code was 780. Edmonton. Mr. David Mackey. The voice was female. Professional. This is Sergeant Morrison with the Edmonton Police Service. Your son, Nathan Mackey, has been involved in a serious motor vehicle collision. He's been transported to the Royal Alexandra Hospital. You're listed as his emergency contact. I drove to Edmonton in 4 hours. The roads were icy, and I white-knuckled the steering wheel the entire way. I called Frank from the highway. He said he and Helen would drive up first thing in the morning. I told him he didn't have to do that. He said, "David, don't be ridiculous. We're coming." Nathan was in the trauma unit when I arrived. A pickup truck had run a stop sign in the snow. Nathan's car took the impact on the driver's side. He had a shattered left leg, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a concussion. He was conscious but sedated, drifting in and out. Jenna was in the hallway when I got there. We hadn't spoken in over 4 years. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Surprise, maybe, or guilt. She said, "He kept asking for you." In the ambulance, he kept saying, "Call my dad." Sophie was sitting in the family waiting area, small and quiet, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She was 6 now, brown hair like Nathan's. She looked up at me with wide eyes and said, "Are you my grandpa?" I crouched down to her level. "I am, sweetheart. I'm right here. Mom said you live far away. That's why you don't visit." I opened my mouth and then closed it. She was 6 years old and her father was in a hospital bed. She didn't need me to explain how I had been deliberately excluded from her life for 4 years. She just needed someone steady to hold on to. "I'm not far away anymore," I said. "I'm right here." Frank and Helen arrived the next morning. Helen immediately took charge of the practical things, finding the hospital's family services office, locating the cafeteria, making sure Sophie had crayons and paper. Frank sat with me in the waiting room and did what Frank does best. He was simply present. "You don't have to stay," I said to him. "David." He put his hand on my shoulder. "How many times do I have to say this? This is what family does. The family you choose shows up, especially when it's hard. Especially then." Nathan's recovery was long and difficult. The leg required surgery and months of physiotherapy. He couldn't drive. He couldn't work. His company gave him short-term disability, but managing the household fell to Jenna, and she fell apart. It turned out that Jenna, for all her confidence and her law degree and her wealthy family in Toronto, had never been the one holding things together. Nathan had. And without him functioning, everything started to crack. Her parents flew in from Toronto for 3 days, criticized the house, suggested she hire a nanny and a cleaner, then flew back. 3 days. That was what their support looked like. So, I stayed. I moved into their guest room. I drove Sophie to school every morning and picked her up every afternoon. I cooked dinners. I cleaned. I helped Nathan to and from his physiotherapy appointments at the clinic on White Avenue. I shoveled the driveway when it snowed, which in Edmonton in January means I shoveled the driveway nearly every day. I did everything a father does, everything I had always wanted to do, while Nathan watched me with a look that got harder to ignore. 3 weeks in, on a Sunday night, Sophie was asleep and Jenna had gone to her parents' hotel for dinner. Nathan called me from the living room where he was propped up on the couch with his leg elevated. "Dad, can you sit down for a minute?" I sat in the armchair across from him. He stared at the ceiling for a long time before he spoke. When the truck hit me, there was this moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe less, where I thought, this is it. This is how I die. And the thing that came into my head Wasn't Jenna. Wasn't Sophie. It was you. It was the last thing I said to you. Don't bother calling. His voice broke. 4 years, Dad. I told you not to call. And then I almost died. And those were going to be my last words to my father, that I didn't want to hear from him. Nathan, I started. Please let me say this. He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. I was a coward. Jenna told me you were difficult. Her parents told me you weren't our kind of people. And I went along with it because it was easier. Because standing up for you meant fighting with her. And I was so tired of fighting. So I just let you disappear. I told Sophie you were busy. I told myself you were fine. I told myself you didn't really need us. He looked at me. And for the first time in years, I saw my son. Not Jenna's husband. Not the man who had asked me for $120,000. My son. The boy I had taught to skate at the Bowness outdoor rink. The kid who used to fall asleep in the truck on the way home from hockey practice. And then you showed up, he said. 4 years of nothing. And the hospital calls you. And you drive 4 hours in January on icy roads and you're just here. You move into my house. You take care of my daughter. You make breakfast every morning and you never once say I told you so. You never once make me feel like I owe you something. And meanwhile, Jenna's parents came for 3 days and spent most of it telling her the house needs better countertops. We sat in silence. I could hear the furnace running, the sound of a snowplow passing on the street outside. Normal life continuing while something enormous shifted between us. I want to meet them, Nathan said quietly. Who? Frank and Helen. Your Monday coffee people. The ones you talk to on the phone every evening when you think I'm asleep. The ones who drove 5 hours to sit in a hospital waiting room because that's what they do. I want to meet the people who were your family when I was too much of a coward to be. My throat tightened. You'd want to do that? I want to thank them, he said, for being there when I wasn't. The first time Nathan came to Monday coffee at Tim Hortons was 2 months later, after he was well enough to travel. I drove him to Calgary, and my heart was pounding the entire way. What if Frank and Helen resented him? What if they judged him for how he had treated me? What if the two halves of my life couldn't fit in the same room? I should have known better. Frank met us at the door, shook Nathan's hand firmly, and said, Your father talks about you all the time. We've been waiting to meet you. Helen hugged him like she'd known him for years. Mabel told him his father painted like a horse wearing mittens, but that he was a good man and Nathan was lucky to have him. Raj brought butter chicken. Nathan was quiet at first, overwhelmed by this warm, loud, generous group of people who had adopted his father when he couldn't be bothered. But George broke the ice by telling a story about Frank getting his beard caught in the Chevelle's engine. And by the time the Timbits were gone, Nathan was laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. On the drive back to Edmonton, Nathan was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I'll never forget. I understand now. Why you said no to the money. Why you kept going back to them every week. They don't need anything from you, Dad. They just want you there. I didn't know how to give you that. I don't think I even knew what it looked like. But I want to learn. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. That's all I've ever wanted, I said. 8 months later, Nathan filed for divorce. It wasn't easy. Jenna fought it. Her parents hired an expensive lawyer from Toronto, but Nathan was steady in a way I had never seen him before, like something had been realigned inside him. The settlement took a year, but he came through it with shared custody of Sophie and a clarity about what mattered that he hadn't had before. He moved back to Calgary, bought a small house in Renfrew, 10 minutes from my place, 15 minutes from Frank and Helen's. Sophie started school at a French immersion program nearby. She began calling me Grandpa David without hesitation, like she was making up for lost time. These days, Monday coffee at Tim Hortons has a few extra chairs. Nathan drops Sophie off at school and joins us when he can. Frank is teaching Sophie how to use a wrench. Helen is teaching her to paint. She's better than me already, which everyone finds hilarious. George brings his girlfriend now, and nobody teases him anymore, or at least not as much. Raj still insists we're all too skinny. Jenna sends polite texts about custody schedules. Her parents haven't visited since the divorce. Nathan doesn't talk about them, and I don't ask. Last Thanksgiving, 6 years after that phone call that told me not to come, I stood in Frank and Helen's kitchen with a glass of wine and watched 3 generations of family, blood, and chosen, filling the house with noise and warmth and the kind of chaos that only happens when people genuinely want to be in the same room. Sophie was helping Raj stir gravy. Nathan and Craig were arguing about hockey. Mabel was telling George's girlfriend a story that was making her cry with laughter. Frank was carving the turkey and doing it wrong, and Helen was pretending not to notice. Nathan caught my eye across the room and raised his glass. "Hey, Dad." "Yeah? Thanks for not giving up on me. Even when I gave you every reason to, I thought about everything that had happened. The phone call, the silence, the money, the accident that finally cracked him open, the slow, careful, sometimes painful work of rebuilding something we had both nearly destroyed. That's what fathers do," I said. "The good ones, anyway." And Frank, who had been listening from the doorway with his ridiculous carving knife, smiled and said, "That's what family does, David. All of us. If you're watching this, and you're going through something similar, whether it's a child who's pulled away, a family that's fractured, or a loneliness you don't know how to carry, I want you to know something. It's never too late. It's never too late to set a boundary. It's never too late to walk into a Tim Hortons and let a stranger change your life. It's never too late to answer the phone when your son finally calls. Family isn't about obligation or blood or who shares your last name. Family is about who shows up. It's about who sits with you on the hard days without trying to fix anything. It's about who hands you a cup of tea and says, "We're here." Every Monday, every Thursday, every time you need us. Frank Olson saw something in me on that cold Monday morning when I was at my lowest. A man carrying something heavy. And because he chose to walk over and say so, I found everything I didn't know I was missing. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what's coming next. And remember, the best revenge isn't loud. It isn't angry. The best revenge is building a life so full of love and belonging that the people who once threw you away finally understand exactly what they lost. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.